They pushed the cleaning lady into the enclosure of the hungry gorilla, and the entire zoo froze. The supervisor didn't just hate her, he wanted her to vanish in front of everyone. She fell onto the damp earth, listening to the animal's heavy breathing and the screams coming from above the wall. The gorilla was enormous, far too strong for any cage to seem safe. He stood up slowly, his chest heaving, his eyes fixed on her. Everyone expected an attack, but the moment the supervisor approached the gate to confirm the end, the gorilla lunged forward and stood between them, a living shield, protecting the woman no one respected and revealing a past that no one there knew. She had worked at that zoo for so long that she no longer remembered when she started being ignored. The cleaning lady arrived early, left late, and cleaned places no one else wanted to touch. Her worn-out uniform was always the same. Her hands were marked by harsh chemicals. To the visitors, she was part of the scenery. To her colleagues, she was a convenient silence. To the supervisor, she was a problem that should never have been hired. The gorilla enclosure was one of the most feared. A wide space, surrounded by high walls and reinforced bars, built to contain brute force. The dominant gorilla had been restless for days. Little food, too much tension. Employees avoided going near it. Visitors watched from a distance, fascinated and frightened by the animal's size and power. One mistake was all it took for something irreversible to happen. The supervisor knew this, and he chose that place on purpose. That morning, the cleaning lady received orders to clean the upper area of the enclosure. It was risky work, always done under pressure. The supervisor watched from afar, waiting for the right moment. There weren't enough witnesses to stop him. There was no one willing to defend her. When she approached the edge of the wall, she felt the push against her back. Strong, sharp, final. The world spun. The ground vanished, and she fell into the space where the gorilla watched everything in silence. Panic exploded, screams, running, cameras raised. Everyone was certain they were about to witness a foretold death. The gorilla stood up, massive, breathing heavily, advancing toward her. But something in that gaze was not blind rage. It was attention. It was recognition. And when the supervisor tried to approach to resolve the situation, the gorilla did the unthinkable. He placed himself between them. From that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. If you are enjoying this story, leave your like right now. Subscribe to the channel. I have a very big dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription makes all the difference. And comment below, which country are you watching this story from? The impact of the fall knocked the wind out of the cleaning lady's lungs. The damp earth of the gorilla enclosure clung to her clothes as she tried to understand where she was. The smell was strong, a mix of leaves, feces, and old food. Above the wall, screams overlapped, voices tripping over each other in panic. She heard someone shout to call security, another pleading for people to move back. Her body trembled, not just from the pain, but from the certainty that this was not a place where humans were meant to be. Slowly, she raised her head and saw the massive shadow moving between the artificial rocks. The gorilla was there, very close, too large for any mistake. The dominant gorilla stood up fully, bracing his knuckles against the ground with force. The sound was sharp and heavy, making the entire enclosure vibrate. His chest heaved with every deep breath, and his dark eyes watched the fallen woman without blinking. The cleaning lady tried to crawl a few inches back, but her body did not respond as it should. Above the wall, the supervisor watched, motionless, with an expression that mixed expectation and contempt. He believed this would end quickly, that the animal would do what everyone expected. The crowd began to retreat, some covering their faces, others pointing phones with trembling hands. She felt her heart beat so hard it felt like it wanted to burst from her chest. Every muscle screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The gorilla took a step forward, then another. Every movement seemed calculated, heavy, conscious. There was no haste. There was no uncontrolled fury. This terrified her even more. She closed her eyes. For a second, remembering all the times she had been humiliated in that place, the harsh orders, the muffled laughter, the constant silence. She never imagined that such contempt would lead her here, thrown like trash inside an enclosure. The gorilla stopped a few meters from her. Silence spread like a blade cutting through the air. She felt the animal's warm breath, heard the low sound coming from his throat. Not quite a roar, but something deep, ancestral. The cleaning lady slowly opened her eyes and found the gorilla's gaze fixed on her. There was no immediate attack. There was no explicit threat. There was observation, as if he were evaluating something beyond the fragile body in front of him. Above, someone shouted for the supervisor to do something. He did not answer. The supervisor approached the side gate, feigning concern. He barked confusing orders, telling people to move back, asking for calm. But his eyes never left the gorilla. He needed this to end the way he had. Imagined. He needed the blame to fall on the accident. Inside the enclosure, the cleaning lady noticed the movement and felt the panic return with force. If the supervisor entered there, everything could spiral out of control. The gorilla shifted his posture, slightly turning his body, as if he had noticed that approach. The animal took another step, now standing exactly between the cleaning lady and the wall where the supervisor was. The gesture was simple, almost imperceptible to those not paying attention, but for her it was everything. The gorilla did not advance toward her. He did not corner her. He placed himself as a barrier, a living shield. The murmur from the outside changed its tone. Some people began to realize that something was wrong or too different to be ignored. The gorilla released a low, firm sound, directed not at the woman, but at the exterior of the enclosure. The cleaning lady felt tears stream down without realizing it. They weren't just from fear, they were from confusion. Why was he there? Why wasn't he attacking her? The gorilla stood firm, his wide body blocking any direct approach. The supervisor stopped. His smile vanished. He felt, for the first time, that something had gone completely out of his control. The security guards looked at each other, unsure of what to do. No one had a protocol for this. The gorilla looked again at the cleaning lady, now with less tension in his shoulders. He sat down slowly, still facing her, maintaining the defensive position. The gesture drew a collective gasp. Some visitors began to cry. Others whispered that this was not normal. The cleaning lady breathed with difficulty, but realized she was still alive. More than that, she was being protected by something everyone there feared. She tried to move her leg and felt a sharp pain, making her groan softly. The gorilla reacted immediately, raising his torso and emitting a grave sound that echoed through the enclosure. The reaction made everyone freeze again. But there was no attack, only an alert. A clear warning that this woman was not to be touched. The zoo's veterinarian approached the bars, eyes wide, trying to understand what he was seeing. That moment marked the beginning of something that no one there would be able to erase. The push, the fall, the silence, the gorilla's position between the cleaning lady and the supervisor, everything was starting to form a story larger than anyone had imagined, and the past that linked that. Invisible woman to the strongest animal in the enclosure was beginning slowly to press against the surface, ready to emerge. The silence that settled after the gorilla's warning was unlike any other the zoo had ever known. It wasn't the silence of immediate fear, but that of perplexity. The cleaning lady remained fallen on the ground, feeling the cold earth against her skin, while the gorilla kept his broad body between her and the wall. His posture was not one of attack, but of containment. His muscles were still tense, ready to react, but there was a strange calm in his movements. Outside, no one seemed to know how to act. The screams stopped. The orders vanished. Only the heavy breathing of the animal and the distant sound of someone crying remained. The cleaning lady tried to prop her elbow on the ground to sit up better, but the pain in her leg made her stop. A small whimper escaped her mouth before she could hold it back. The gorilla reacted instantly, turning his head toward her, alert to every sign. He didn't approach, but he didn't pull away either. He just watched, as if evaluating her condition. This detail did not go unnoticed by the veterinarian, who drew even closer to the bars, carefully analyzing every gesture. That was not random behavior. There was intent. There was awareness. The supervisor wiped the sweat from his forehead and tried to regain the authority he had always exercised with ease. He raised his voice, ordering the public to move back, demanding the guards resolve the situation, but his voice sounded hollow. No one moved. The guards hesitated, fearing they would provoke a reaction from the gorilla. For the first time, the supervisor was not immediately obeyed. He felt a tightening in his chest, an uncomfortable sense of exposure. That scene was being recorded by dozens of cell phones. Control was gone. Inside the enclosure, the cleaning lady breathed with difficulty, trying to stay calm. She noticed the gorilla didn't take his eyes off her for long, but he also cast quick glances toward the wall, especially when the supervisor moved. It was as if the animal were monitoring threats. This perception made her heart race in a different way. It wasn't just fear, it was confusion. She never imagined being protected by something everyone feared, especially in that place where she had always been treated as disposable. The gorilla took a few sidesteps, adjusting his position, always keeping himself between her and the outer area. The gesture was clear enough to draw murmurs from the crowd. Some people began to realize the animal wasn't acting on impulse. He was choosing. The veterinarian whispered something about social behavior, the protection of vulnerable group members, but quickly stopped himself. The cleaning lady was not part of that group, at least not officially. That made it all the more inexplicable. The supervisor took a step forward, irritated by the lack of reaction. He got too close to the bars, gesturing, shouting that they needed to get the woman out of there immediately. The gorilla turned his body abruptly, slamming his fist against the ground with force. The sound echoed through the enclosure, making everyone retreat. The threat was now clear, and it was not directed at the cleaning lady. The supervisor turned pale. He understood at that moment that he was no longer the master of the situation. The cleaning lady closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the tears stream down. They weren't just from fear or pain. They were from something she hadn't felt in a long time, being seen, recognized, even if by an animal. When she opened her eyes again, she found the gorilla still there, firm and watchful. He sat down slowly, without moving his body from in front of her, as if saying without words that this had not ended. The outer murmur turned into a heavy, almost respectful silence. The veterinarian tried to communicate with the gorilla using slow gestures, avoiding direct eye contact. Every move was calculated. The cleaning lady watched everything closely, her body tired but her mind alert. She noticed something no one else had. The gorilla seemed to respond more to the supervisor's movements than to hers. When she moved, he merely watched. When the supervisor moved, the animal's body stiffened. That spoke volumes. The crowd began to split between fear and indignation. Some people pointed at the supervisor, whispering accusations. Others demanded explanations. The accident narrative began to fall apart before everyone's eyes. The gorilla remained motionless, watchful, like a silent guardian. The cleaning lady felt a tightness in her chest as she realized this protection was not random. There was something there that she herself didn't yet fully understand. That moment stretched out, laden with tension and meaning. The push, the fall, the gorilla's posture, everything was beginning to connect in an unsettling way. The past the cleaning lady had tried to bury under years of silence and hard work was starting to press to the surface. And as the gorilla stood between her and the man who had pushed her, it became increasingly clear that this story would not end there. Something bigger was about to be revealed. The tension inside the enclosure seemed to have slowed time to a crawl. The cleaning lady felt every beat of her own heart reverberate in her ears, while the gorilla remained motionless before her, broad, solid, like a living fortress. The damp ground chilled her skin, but she barely noticed. What terrified her most wasn't the animal's proximity, but the growing realization that something deeply wrong was happening. Wrong for those watching from the outside, but not for her. The gorilla breathed in a controlled manner, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Whenever the supervisor moved, no matter how small the gesture, the animal's body reacted. It was impossible to ignore that directed vigilance. The cleaning lady tried to adjust her body again, seeking to relieve the pressure on her injured leg. The movement was slow and careful. The gorilla followed with his eyes, but showed no sign of aggression. He simply watched, attentive, as if evaluating whether she needed something. Outside, the veterinarian pressed his face even closer to the bars, furrowing his brow. This contradicted every known pattern. The gorilla didn't see the woman as an intruder. He didn't treat her as a threat. And he definitely didn't treat her as prey. The supervisor felt sweat trickling down the back of his neck. He tried to speak again, his voice lower, almost pleading, asking them to open the side gate, to resolve this absurd situation quickly, but no one moved. The guards exchanged uncertain glances, caught between the authority they had always obeyed and the reality before their eyes. Every second that passed strengthened the feeling that this man had crossed an irreversible line. And the gorilla seemed to know this better than anyone there. Inside the cage, the cleaning lady began to feel something strange emerge from the depths of her memory. It wasn't a clear memory, but an old sensation, almost physical. The sound of the gorilla's breathing, the slow rhythm, the way he positioned himself, it all stirred echoes of another time, of a smaller, quieter space. She closed her eyes for a moment and saw blurred flashes, a temporary enclosure, low bars, human hands extended with care. When she opened her eyes again, the gorilla was still there, steady, as if he had been waiting. The animal took 2 slow steps to the side, repositioning himself even more clearly between her and the wall. The gesture drew a collective murmur. It wasn't just symbolic protection. It was a deliberate choice. The veterinarian raised his hand to his mouth, unable to hide his shock. That didn't fit into any simple explanation. The gorilla wasn't reacting to her fear. He was reacting to the external threat, and that completely transformed the reading of the scene. The cleaning lady felt the tears return, but she didn't try to hold them back. Something inside her began to understand what she didn't yet dare to admit. She had always believed that certain choices made in the past would never be remembered, that silence would swallow everything. But there, before this giant animal, she felt that nothing had been forgotten. The gorilla turned his head slightly toward her, his dark eyes meeting hers for a brief instant. There was no anger, there was recognition, a recognition that spanned years. The supervisor took another step, irritated, trying to force a reaction. The gorilla responded immediately, slamming his fist into the ground with enough force to make the entire enclosure vibrate. The warning was clear, final. The crowd retreated in unison. The supervisor stopped, pale, feeling his authority slip through his fingers. For the first time, he was not the most dangerous man in that space. The threat had shifted sides. The cleaning lady took a deep breath, feeling her chest tighten. That position between the gorilla and the supervisor was starting to make sense in a way that frightened her. She now remembered more clearly nights when she had stayed hidden after hours, a cub too fragile to be left alone, orders ignored in silence. She remembered the constant fear of being discovered, and she remembered above all a promise made to herself, not to abandon that animal, even if no one ever knew. The veterinarian began to speak to the guards in low tones, trying to reorganize the situation. He was no longer looking only at the gorilla, but at the cleaning lady, as if he were beginning to understand that she was the key to everything. The crowd murmured, connecting the dots, realizing this was no accident. The gorilla sat down slowly, still keeping his broad body between her and the wall, as if saying that this moment had not ended, that no one would pass without facing the truth. That chapter of the story closed with an unsettling certainty. The gorilla was not just protecting a fallen woman, he was defending something built in the past, something that had been forcibly silenced. And as he stood there, firm and watchful, it became clear that the revelation of that bond could no longer be avoided. What had begun as an act of cruelty was now moving toward becoming a public judgment, and no one there was prepared for what would come next. Silence settled once again, heavy as concrete. The cleaning lady felt her body grow weary, but her mind remained alert, trying to track every movement of the gorilla and every reaction from the outside. The animal took deep breaths, his broad shoulders rising and falling steadily. Whenever the supervisor moved, even if he just shifted his weight from one leg to the other, the gorilla adjusted his posture, keeping himself firmly between them. It no longer seemed like instinct, it seemed like a decision. The crowd watched in reverent silence, as if everyone knew they were witnessing something that should not be interrupted. The cleaning lady tried to better support her back against an artificial rock in the enclosure, seeking to relieve the pain in her leg. The movement was slow and careful. The gorilla followed with his eyes, but showed no aggression. On the contrary, he took a small step to the side, ensuring she had more space behind him. This detail drew a collective gasp. The veterinarian ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. That wasn't in any manual. The gorilla was adjusting his own body to protect someone who was not part of his group. The supervisor tried to speak again, but his voice came out weak, almost unrecognizable. He claimed it had all been an accident, that the woman had slipped, that panic was exaggerating the situation. But no one believed him. Hard stares turned toward him. Someone pointed a finger. Another began to shout that they had seen the push. The supervisor felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. Inside the enclosure, the gorilla abruptly turned his head toward that louder sound, emitting a low grunt, enough to silence the crowd instantly. The cleaning lady closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the memories grow. They were no longer blurred fragments. Now they came with shape and order, a time when the gorilla was still too young to inspire fear, when he had been kept in an isolated space after a poorly documented transfer. She remembered the frightened look, the improvised feeding, the nights she stayed past her shift, defying direct orders. She remembered being warned not to form a bond, and she remembered ignoring that, in silence. When she opened her eyes again, she found the gorilla still standing firm in front of her. He watched her out of the corner of his eye, attentive, but without tension. It made her swallow hard. There was no denying what was forming there. The gorilla seemed to be reacting not just to the present, but to their shared past. Outside, the veterinarian began making rapid notes, muttering dates, names, and broken protocols. Every note was a step further toward a truth that no one wanted to face. The supervisor tried to pull away, but he was restrained by two security guards who, until that day, had never questioned his orders. The gesture was discreet, but final. Authority had shifted places. The crowd murmured, realizing that something was being decided there, not just for the cleaning lady, but for the entire institution. Inside the cage, the gorilla stood fast, as if he felt that change of power in the air. The cleaning lady felt a wave of dizziness and had to brace her hand against the ground. A low moan escaped her lips. The gorilla reacted immediately, leaning his torso forward and emitting a deep sound directed outside the enclosure. It wasn't a random warning. It was too clear to be ignored. The veterinarian raised his hand, calling for calm. He understood now that any sudden gesture could break that delicate balance. The public watched in absolute silence. Some cried, others seemed unable to look away. This was no longer a curious accident or a moment of animal tension. It was a human story being exposed in its rawest form. The cleaning lady, invisible for so many years, was now at the center of everything, and the gorilla, a symbol of brute strength, had become her unlikely protector. The gorilla took 2 slow steps forward, and then sat down, still keeping his broad body between her and the wall. The gesture conveyed a strange, almost solemn calm. The cleaning lady took a deep breath, her chest tightening with emotion. She had never asked for recognition. She had never asked for defense. But now there, she felt that something needed to be said, that silence could no longer protect her, nor the gorilla. The veterinarian moved even closer to the bars, and with a firm voice announced that they would need to review the old records immediately. He spoke of an investigation, of responsibilities, of consequences. The words echoed like a final warning. The supervisor lowered his head. Inside the cage, the gorilla remained motionless, watchful, as if he knew this moment was decisive. The cleaning lady felt that the past was about to be torn from the shadows, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, could stop it now. The air seemed heavier as the truth began to organize itself before everyone. The cleaning lady felt her body grow weary, her leg throbbing, but there was a strange lucidity in her thoughts. The gorilla remained alert, breathing deeply, as if each of his inhalations helped sustain that unlikely balance. The silence around them was no longer just fear. It was anticipation. People were waiting for something they didn't yet know how to name, but felt was about to happen. The veterinarian rested his arms on the bars, his eyes fixed on the gorilla, and then on the cleaning lady. He now remembered old stories, whispers among older employees, comments that never turned into formal complaints, a young gorilla that had been kept isolated for too long, a worker who stayed after hours without an official explanation, protocols that had been flexed in silence. All of it, previously disconnected, was beginning to make sense in an unsettling way. The cleaning lady took a deep breath and realized there was no point in pretending that past didn't exist anymore. The memories came too clearly. She remembered the initial fear, the unexpected responsibility, the way the young gorilla would calm down when he heard her low voice. She remembered being warned, threatened with dismissal, instructed to keep her distance, and she remembered, above all, having disobeyed, not out of rebellion, but out of humanity. The gorilla, now an adult, seemed to feel that memory echoing in the present. The supervisor, isolated a few steps back, tried once more to regain control of the narrative. He spoke of procedures, of isolated errors, of decisions that had not been his. His words rang hollow. The crowd reacted with murmurs of disbelief. Some people shouted that it didn't explain the push. Others pointed to the gorilla, saying the animal didn't lie. The supervisor felt the weight of public judgment closing in around him. Inside the enclosure, the gorilla moved slowly, approaching the cleaning lady, and then returning to position himself between her and the wall. The gesture was clear, repeated, conscious. There was no longer any doubt. He was protecting someone specific. The veterinarian closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing what he saw. This was not a behavior learned in captivity. It was a bond that had survived time, isolation, and human violence. The cleaning lady felt tears stream down again, but she didn't try to hold them back. For the first time, she didn't feel ashamed of being seen. The gorilla cast her a quick glance, almost gentle for someone of his size, and then went back to facing the outside of the enclosure. The contrast was too powerful to be ignored. The strongest animal there stood as a shield, while the man who should have protected her hid behind fragile justifications. The veterinarian raised his voice, asking for the central administration and the responsible authorities to be called. He spoke of an immediate investigation, of deleted records, of criminal responsibilities. The words echoed like a point of no return. The supervisor turned pale. There was no way to contain what was forming. The past, silenced for convenience, was being forcibly dragged into the light. The crowd reacted with a mix of indignation and shock. People commented that the woman should never have been alone there. Others said the gorilla was just returning the care he had received. Inside the cage, the cleaning lady felt her body tremble, not from fear, but from emotional exhaustion. The gorilla remained firm, watchful, as if perceiving every variation in her state. The wind blew lightly over the enclosure, kicking up dry leaves. The gorilla took a deep breath and sat down again, maintaining his protective stance. The scene seemed almost too symbolic to be real. The cleaning lady realized that this moment was not just about survival. It was about being recognized, not as a hero, but as someone who had made the right choice when no one else would. That chapter closed with an inescapable certainty. The story could no longer be reversed. The push, the gorilla's protection, the revealed memories, everything had connected before too many witnesses. And what had begun as an attempt at humiliation was transforming into a public exposure of guilt and humanity. The past was alive, and it no longer intended to stay silent. The atmosphere inside the enclosure had shifted irreversibly. The cleaning lady felt her body grow heavy, as if every muscle carried years of accumulated silence. Yet there was a new clarity in her thoughts. The gorilla remained alert, breathing deeply, keeping his body positioned between her and the outside world. It was no longer just instinctive protection. There was intent in that gesture. Outside, people watched with a mixture of reverence and unease, as if witnessing something that transcended simple animal behavior. The veterinarian took a few steps along the fence, analyzing every detail. He noticed how the gorilla reacted to the supervisor's movements with immediate tension, while accepting the cleaning lady's small shifts without any sign of threat. That spoke volumes. The cleaning lady realized that the vet was now looking at her with a different gaze, trying to understand who she truly was in this context, not just an employee, but the central piece of an unresolved story. The supervisor tried once more to interfere, raising his voice in an authoritative tone that no longer convinced anyone. He said things were out of control, that they needed to act before it was too late. But his words rang hollow. The gorilla slowly turned his head toward him, eyes fixed, body stiffening. There was no attack, only a silent warning. The supervisor stepped back without realizing it. The crowd noticed, and they understood. The cleaning lady took a deep breath, feeling a strange pressure in her chest. The memories were now complete, no longer fragmented. She remembered when the gorilla was still too small to inspire fear, how he would hide behind her when someone approached abruptly. She remembered sharing water, food, and silence. She remembered being threatened, warned, and isolated, and she remembered continuing anyway. The gorilla seemed to recognize that memory in the present, as if the past were alive between them. The veterinarian moved even closer to the fence and spoke firmly to the guards. He said no one should approach the gate without a clear strategy. Any wrong move could trigger an unpredictable reaction. The cleaning lady listened intently, but her focus remained on the gorilla. She realized now that he wasn't just defending her body, but the space around her. He was creating an invisible border that no one dared to cross. The crowd's posture began to change. It was no longer just curiosity or fear. There was indignation. People murmured that this needed to be investigated. Some shouted that they had seen the push. The supervisor, pressured from all sides, felt the weight of the situation growing. He realized he had lost control, not just of the enclosure, but of the entire narrative. And the gorilla, standing there, was the living proof of it. Inside the cage, the cleaning lady tried to adjust her position again. The pain in her leg was intense, but she didn't want to show weakness. The gorilla followed every move closely, stepping a little nearer when she winced in pain. The gesture was small but clear. He was attentive to her state. The vet swallowed hard. This could no longer be explained away as a fluke. A light wind blew, carrying dry leaves across the enclosure. The gorilla took a deep breath and then did something no one expected. He partially turned his body, standing sideways, but without abandoning his protective stance. It was as if he were saying he was willing to remain there for as long as necessary. The cleaning lady felt tears stream down again. Not out of fear, but of recognition. This protection hadn't been asked for, but it was being offered. The supervisor tried to walk away once more, but was firmly held back by a security guard. Authority had definitively shifted. The gorilla cast one last look in his direction, then returned his attention to the cleaning lady. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Strength without violence, power without abuse. The entire enclosure seemed to have learned a silent lesson in that instant. The chapter closed with a clear certainty: the gorilla would not leave that spot. Not as long as the cleaning lady remained vulnerable. And the past that united them could no longer be hidden. The truth was alive, breathing. Behind bars, ready to push even further. What would come next wouldn't just be a revelation, it would be a consequence. Time moved in a strange way, as if the enclosure were isolated from the rest of the world. The cleaning lady felt her body grow weary, but there was a new steadiness in her breathing. The gorilla remained alert, occupying the space between her and the wall as if it were his natural place. Outside, authorities began to arrive, but no one dared to interfere without clear guidance. The scene demanded respect. There was no chaotic urgency, only a silent tension that held every gaze captive. The veterinarian was the first to break the silence, speaking in a controlled voice about old records that were now beginning to be confirmed. He mentioned a period of improvised quarantine, a young gorilla kept isolated for longer than permitted, and a worker who stayed after hours without formal authorization. As he spoke, his eyes flickered between the animal and the cleaning lady, as if he were assembling a puzzle in front of everyone. The crowd listened with growing intensity. The cleaning lady closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the words. There was no longer any way to deny it. The past she had kept in silence was being exposed, piece by piece. She remembered the first night she stayed alone with the cub, the fear of making a mistake, the decision to stay anyway. She remembered how the gorilla would calm down when she sang softly, how he would hide behind. But when someone raised their voice, opening her eyes, she found the gorilla looking in her direction, as if those memories belonged to him too. The supervisor, now surrounded by hard stares, tried to interrupt the veterinarian, claiming a lack of proof and calling it all speculation. His voice sounded weak, out of place. The gorilla reacted immediately to the raised tone, slamming his fist into the ground with enough force to silence everyone. The warning left no room for interpretation. The eye. Supervisor backed away, feeling his body betray the authority he once displayed with ease. That reaction was captured by dozens of cameras. The crowd began to murmur more intensely. People connected the dots, commenting on the relationship between care and behavior, on the fact that the gorilla reacted only to the external threat. The cleaning lady listened with a racing heart. She had never imagined her story would be told this way, before strangers, under this kind of light. Yet, she felt she could no longer hide. The gorilla stood firm, as if giving her permission to exist there. The veterinarian took a deep breath and continued, now mentioning internal warnings that had never been formalized, reports that vanished, and decisions made to avoid scandals. Each sentence made it harder for the supervisor to sustain any alternative narrative. The security guards positioned themselves more clearly, isolating him from the rest of the group. The shift in power was visible. Inside the cage, the gorilla followed everything closely, reacting to every gesture of the man who had pushed the cleaning lady. The cleaning lady felt her leg throb and let out a sigh of pain. The gorilla approached a few steps, not in a threatening way but a careful one, and then returned to his position between her and the wall. The gesture was simple but loaded with meaning. He didn't need to touch her to protect her. Being there was enough. The veterinarian watched this in silence, aware that he was witnessing something that would change protocols and perceptions forever. The authorities exchanged quick words, evaluating possibilities. The priority was to remove the woman safely, but no one dared act without considering the gorilla's reaction. The cleaning lady perceived the conflict on the faces around her. They wanted to help her, but they feared breaking the bond that was keeping her alive. The gorilla remained watchful, his eyes tracking every movement near the gate. There was no haste. There was vigilance. The supervisor tried to speak again, but he was interrupted by one of the officers, who asked him to remain silent. That gesture was more symbolic than any word. The gorilla looked briefly in that direction and then returned his attention to the cleaning lady. The message was clear. The threat had been identified and neutralized. The past that united them was now exposed, and nothing could make it disappear again. The chapter closed with the feeling that the decisive moment was approaching. The truth had been spoken aloud. The bond had been recognized. All that remained was to face the practical consequences of it all. The cleaning lady remained alive, protected by something greater than physical strength, and the gorilla, standing between her and the world, seemed prepared for whatever came next. The tension in the enclosure had transformed into something denser, almost palpable. The cleaning lady felt her body grow heavy, each breath demanding effort, but her mind remained surprisingly clear. The gorilla stayed firm, watchful, occupying the space between her and the wall as if it were an irrevocable decision. Outside, no one spoke loudly. The authorities, the employees, the visitors, everyone seemed to understand that any out-of-place sound could break a balance far too fragile to be tested. The veterinarian approached the bars with extreme care, keeping his movements slow and predictable. He spoke now in a low tone, explaining to the officers that they would need to remove the woman without provoking the gorilla. Every word was measured. He knew this was no ordinary rescue. The cleaning lady heard everything, but her gaze remained on the gorilla. She noticed small changes in his posture, almost imperceptible adjustments that revealed constant alertness. He wasn't tired. He was vigilant. The memories continued to organize themselves within her. Now they came complete, without the weight of confusion. She remembered how the young gorilla would always approach whenever she entered the makeshift enclosure, how he would calm down upon hearing her low voice, how he would cower when someone shouted. She remembered being warned more than once, being called irresponsible, being threatened with firing, and she remembered staying anyway. The gorilla seemed to sense that flow of memory, keeping close without invading her space. The supervisor watched everything from a distance, isolated, his face rigid. He no longer tried to justify himself. He knew any word would be useless. The crowd now saw him not as an authority, but as an aggressor. The cleaning lady felt a tightening in her chest as she realized that, even in that moment, his fear did not compare to the fear she had carried for years in silence. The gorilla cast a quick glance in the man's direction and then repositioned himself, reinforcing the invisible barrier. The veterinarian began to draw up a simple plan. Soft sound distractions, coordinated movements. No. Direct eye contact with the gorilla. He spoke to the security guards as if he were dealing with something sacred. The cleaning lady realized that, for the first time, everyone was willing to respect her rhythm and the animals. That was new. That hurt in a different way. The gorilla remained motionless, but his eyes followed every gesture from the outside. The pain in her leg became more intense, causing her to groan softly. The gorilla reacted immediately, moving a bit closer and emitting a grave sound, directed not at her but at the surroundings. The warning was clear. The veterinarian raised his hand. asking them to stop. He understood now that any rushed attempt could be interpreted as a threat. Time didn't matter. Her safety mattered. The crowd watched in absolute silence. Some cried. Others kept their eyes fixed, unable to look away. The story no longer belonged only to that enclosure. It would spread. The cleaning lady felt it. She felt that the silence that had accompanied her for so many years was finally being replaced by something irreversible. The gorilla, standing firm at her side, seemed to be the guardian of that transition. The authorities decided to wait a few more minutes, respecting the gorilla's behavior. The supervisor was led several steps back, removed from the visible area for good. The gorilla slightly relaxed his shoulders, but did not abandon his position. The cleaning lady noticed the change and breathed a little easier. That confirmed what everyone already knew. The threat had never been the animal. The veterinarian approached the bars again and spoke directly to the cleaning lady, explaining that when the moment came, she would need to move slowly, following the instructions exactly. She nodded her head, feeling a chill in her stomach. The gorilla turned his face toward her, attentive. There was no panic in that look. There was expectation, as if they both knew that moment was approaching. A light wind blew, kicking up dust and dry leaves. The gorilla took a deep breath and then positioned himself even more clearly between her and the outside world, as if saying he was ready. The cleaning lady felt her heart tighten. That protection could not last forever. She knew that. But she also knew that this moment could never be erased. What had been built there would remain, regardless of what came after. The chapter closed with the feeling that the next step would be decisive. The removal, the final reaction, the inevitable confrontation with the consequences. The cleaning lady remained alive, protected by a bond no one had planned. And the gorilla, motionless and watchful, seemed prepared to choose again, if necessary. The atmosphere felt suspended in a strange interval, as if time itself had been placed on hold. The cleaning lady felt her body exhausted, but there was an unexpected calm in her breathing. The gorilla remained firm, occupying the space between her and the wall with silent determination. His dark eyes slowly scanned the enclosure, alert to any change. Outside, the veterinarian exchanged discreet signals with the security guards, conscious that this moment required more sensitivity than force. No one dared to speak loudly. Respect dominated the space. The cleaning lady tried to move a little, bracing her hand on the ground to relieve the pressure on her injured leg. The movement was slow, almost imperceptible. The gorilla reacted immediately, slightly turning his body, but without showing any signs of aggression. He simply watched, evaluating if she was all right. This simple gesture reinforced what everyone had already understood. The animal did not see her as an intruder. He saw her as someone in need of protection. The veterinarian swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that realization. This would change everything. The supervisor, now moved away and under surveillance, watched the scene in silence. His face was tense, his eyes avoided the enclosure. He realized there was no longer any room for alternative versions. Every gesture of the gorilla, every reaction of the cleaning lady, dismantled any attempt to deny the push. The crowd began to murmur again, but now in a different tone. It wasn't panic, it was judgment. People knew exactly who had provoked this moment. Inside the cage, the gorilla took a few slow steps to the side, opening a small space in front of the cleaning lady. The gesture was subtle, but clear. It wasn't a retreat. It was a choice. The cleaning lady felt her heart race as she noticed it. The veterinarian noticed it too. He raised his hand, calling for absolute silence. That movement by the gorilla wasn't random. It seemed like an invitation, or perhaps a permission. The cleaning lady took a deep breath, feeling the heavy air enter her lungs. She knew this could be the moment to try and leave, but she also knew that any false step could change everything. The gorilla remained attentive, but he did not block the space he had opened. His Eyes remained on her, not with a threat, but with expectation. Outside, the guards awaited instructions, motionless as statues. The veterinarian spoke in a low voice, almost a whisper, guiding the cleaning lady to move only when she felt safe. No sudden gestures, no rush. She nodded slightly, feeling her hands tremble. The gorilla did not move. He only watched. That shared silence seemed laden with something greater than words. It was trust built in a past that was now revealing itself before everyone. She began to crawl slowly, supporting her weight on the arm that ached less. Every conquered inch was accompanied by the gorilla's watchful gaze. He kept himself still, but ready. Outside, no one breathed. The crowd was frozen, aware that any reaction could be fatal. The cleaning lady felt her heart beating hard, but not out of absolute fear. It was something else. It was focus. As she neared the space closest to the bars, the gorilla took a step forward and then stopped, positioning himself again between her and the wall, but now in a different way. He wasn't blocking the exit. He was only monitoring the surroundings. The veterinarian felt a shiver run down his spine. This wasn't blind defense. It was coordination. The animal seemed to understand what was happening. The cleaning lady stopped for a moment, feeling the pain throb. She looked at the gorilla and, without thinking, murmured something nearly inaudible. It wasn't an order. It wasn't a request. It was a thank you that escaped before it could be contained. The gorilla slightly tilted his head, a small gesture, but enough to draw tears from those watching. That instant seemed to seal something invisible. The guards positioned themselves with extreme care on the outside, following the veterinarian's instructions. The enclosure's internal door began to be prepared, but not yet opened. Everything needed to happen at the right pace. The gorilla stayed firm, watchful, as if he knew this was the decisive moment. The cleaning lady took a deep breath, feeling she was about to cross a boundary that wasn't just physical. The chapter closed with maximum tension, suspended in the air. The exit was near. The truth had been exposed. The gorilla continued there, ready to choose again, if necessary. And everyone knew that the next move would define not only the cleaning lady's fate, but the meaning of everything they had witnessed until then. The moment of removal began without fanfare, almost like a silent agreement between everyone present. The cleaning lady felt her body shudder with exhaustion, but her mind was clear. The gorilla remained alert, following every movement around him with impressive precision. When the security guards finally positioned themselves as directed by the veterinarian, the animal adjusted his posture, keeping himself between her and any possible external threat. There was no sudden tension, only vigilance. The entire enclosure seemed to breathe in the same slow rhythm. The cleaning lady began to move again, now with more confidence, despite the pain in her leg. The gorilla watched every gesture, ready to react if anything went unexpected. The veterinarian spoke softly, almost as if he were inside the cage with them. The crowd remained in absolute silence. When the inner door finally opened, creating a safe corridor, the cleaning lady paused for a moment. She felt the weight of that second. It wasn't just about leaving that place, it was about leaving behind years of forced silence. Before completely crossing the threshold of the enclosure, she turned her face. The gorilla was there, motionless, his eyes fixed on her. There was no aggression, there was no urgency. There was something definitive in that gaze, like a final recognition. She felt tears stream down without trying to hide them. She took one more step, then another. The gorilla stayed where he was, watching, as if he knew his role at that moment had been fulfilled. Outside, the arms that supported her trembled almost as much as her own. The veterinarian approached quickly, assessing her injuries, while doctors took over her care. A timid applause began somewhere in the crowd and soon spread, not as a celebration, but as a mark of respect. The supervisor watched the scene while being escorted away, his gaze downcast, finally reduced to what he had always been, someone incapable of taking responsibility. Inside the enclosure, the gorilla walked a few steps, took a deep breath, and then sat down. His calm behavior continued, as if nothing but that moment mattered. The veterinarian observed the animal for long seconds, aware that this episode would redefine protocols, studies, and perceptions. There was no longer any way to ignore what everyone had seen. This hadn't been a fluke, it was a bond. The hours that followed were marked by statements, records, and urgent decisions. Authorities formalized the investigation. Witnesses reported the push. Old records began to be reviewed. The cleaning lady's name, finally spoken aloud, now circulated as a symbol of something greater than simple survival. The zoo entered a process of forced transformation, pressured by a truth impossible to silence. In the hospital, the cleaning lady rested, feeling her body heavy but her mind light. For the first time in years, no one treated her like part of the background scenery. The veterinarian visited her, confirming that the gorilla remained calm, that his behavior had been documented, and that their bond would not be ignored. She listened to everything in silence, feeling a kind of relief she didn't know how to name. It wasn't victory, it was closure. Days later, the story had already moved beyond the zoo's walls. People questioned past abuses, old decisions, and convenient silences. The gorilla had become a symbol of protection, not a threat. The cleaning lady, away from work, received support she had never imagined. The supervisor, now officially accused, faded from the public narrative as someone who had chosen to push and was exposed for it. She returned to the zoo weeks later, invited, not forced. She didn't approach the enclosure. It wasn't necessary. From a distance, she saw the gorilla walking calmly, healthy and respected. There was no dramatic exchange of glances, only the silent certainty that both had fulfilled their roles in that moment. And that was enough. The gorilla remained there, strong and watchful, reminding everyone that the true danger is not always found in brute force. Sometimes it wears a uniform, occupies an office, and believes no one is watching. That cage, which should have been the end, became the exact point where the truth decided to stand between the abuser and the victim. If this story moved you, leave a like right now. Subscribe to the channel. I have a very big dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription makes all the difference. And comment below, from which country are you watching this story? Some stories are not about monsters, but about choices, about who pushes and who protects. The cleaning lady spent years being ignored, carrying silence, fear, and wounded dignity. The gorilla, deprived of everything he needed, was still able to recognize who stood by his side when no one else would. The attack never happened because the bond was stronger than the violence, because memory triumphed over abuse, because in GU moment, strength chose to stand between injustice and the victim. May this story serve as a reminder, not every threat has claws, and not every protection comes from where we expect. Sometimes the truth simply stands up and stands in the middle.